Sometimes it doesn't matter how quality the ingredients are in the kitchen if the chef that's handling them doesn't really know what they're doing, and the dish that's served is just an expensive disappointment for the diner's palate. Such is the case with Tokyo Vice, an HBO Max original series about an American newspaper journalist infiltrating and reporting on the Japanese underground crime syndicates. To give the broadest of summaries, the show is about Jake Adelstein, based on the real Jake Adelstein, becoming the first foreign reporter to work at Mecho Shimbun, Tokyo's most prestigious newspaper. Once there, he begins obsessively poking and prodding at the infamous Yakuza criminal underworld run by various crime organizations, doing whatever he can to bring seedy stories and characters to light, while making enemies and allies on both sides of the law. Now that right there sounds like a golden ticket for a compelling drama. You've got a stranger in a strange land, crime, corruption, sex, violence, and plenty of nuance with which to juggle a narrative. Everything you need is built right into the concept, so this should be a slam dunk for any competent team of writers. But it's in the execution of these concepts that Tokyo Vice falls horribly flat. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to do what any pretentious wannabe YouTuber critic does in this situation. I'm going to compare it to The Wire. The Wire, one of the most highly regarded television shows of all time, utilized a format of directing viewers through a series of characters to gain little snippets of their story in order to cast a wide swath of characters and events which feed into each other to build a grand and cohesive narrative, which is something Tokyo Vice attempts to do as well. The problem, however, is that while The Wire's cast of rich and compelling characters with unique and mysterious backgrounds grew as the series wore on, Tokyo Vice forces you to hang out with people you don't know and, more importantly, don't give a fuck about. So, for example, you'll spend a bit of time with Detective Hiroto Katagari, played by Ken Watanabe, as a grizzled veteran detective struggling to navigate rival gangs and maintain peace, so Tokyo doesn't descend into gangland warfare. Then you're whisked off to Samantha Porter, an American woman who works as a hostess, and who the fuck cares? Bring back Ken Watanabe. I have a long-standing theory that if you took the movie Gangs of New York and edited out every scene that has Cameron Diaz in it, it would be a better film. And it's the same case here. Take out any scene involving this woman and you have a tighter and more compelling show. And it isn't because she's a woman. Hell, Jake's editor at the newspaper, a smart-driven hard-ass who humbles Jake the first time they meet, is 10 times more interesting of a character. But just like Japan's patriarchal social structure, the show mostly pushes her into the background unjustly. But whereas the first few seasons of The Wire slowly introduce characters, give them interesting and thought-provoking motivations and backstories, and employed them as a reliable ensemble to keep the audience on their toes, Tokyo Vice tries to speedrun that shit, causing me to lose interest in half of the show's cast and runtime. So even though you're jumping between Yakuza gangsters conspiring, a newspaper journalist trying to build connections and uncover the truth, a police detective trying to maintain peace, and a nightclub that ties many of them together, it's also fucking boring because of how it's presented. The result is that Tokyo Vice is an hour-long TV show where each episode feels more like 90 minutes. This isn't helped by the show's other big problem, the pacing and structure. Okay, so in the first episode we are introduced to Jake, the aforementioned journalist, and Detective Katagari, the aforementioned police detective. Jake is shown to be totally immersed in Japanese culture in his quest to become a crime reporter for a newspaper. Then, once he attains that position, he is immediately frustrated by the traditions of Japanese journalism, which are only to report the information given to them by authorities, rather than pursuing answers themselves. Why this is a complete surprise to him when he is, again, completely immersed in Japanese culture and is shown to have been doing years of intense studying just to get the job, got me. I mean, what the fuck was on that test? Anyway, Detective Katagari is similarly shown to be frustrated, but with police procedure, specifically their unwillingness to pursue real investigations in favor of doing whatever is needed to ensure a conviction is attained, meaning that larger criminal conspiracies largely go ignored as it may adversely affect the conviction rate. Now, given what I just told you about these characters, it should be pretty obvious where this is headed, that the frustrated journalist and frustrated detective will team up and work together to satisfy each other's goals. The problem is that once you make that realization, you still have another 90 minutes of runtime to get through before the narrative figures this out and they actually meet. This is a recurring problem in the series, as events telegraph events that are obviously going to happen, but then the show jerks off for a few hours until they can occur. Like, if I told you some inconsequential character shows up and tries to extort Mark, the hostess lady who is dating a high-level Yakuza enforcer, you would obviously think that there is going to be a confrontation between them. Well, sorry, we'll get to that in 2 hours of runtime, which will feel like 3. And did I mention the entire first season is only 8 hours? But despite the wasted opportunities, the hampered pacing, and characters no one gives a fuck about, the show's biggest crime is the dialogue. At some point around the 3rd episode, I would have sworn that this show was actually written by Japanese writers who didn't really grasp how people in the West spoke to each other. Or maybe their understanding was limited to episodes of Seventh Heaven. Nope, most of the writers are American. Whenever Jake speaks to anyone from back home or listens to tapes sent by his younger sister, they sound like they were written by David Lynch, in that way where it's technically English but also jilted and overdramatic. The main character, Jake, isn't much better. Whenever he tries to put on his "I'm a journalist" hat, he sounds like he's still learning English and only knows a few basic phrases. "What's it like being a Yakuza?" he asks the Yakuza gangster, and when the guy doesn't answer, he basically gives up. Like there aren't an infinite number of ways to engage with a person and get them to drop their guard. "What's it like in America?" the gangster asks him. "That's a big question," he responds before mentioning football and letting that be the entirety of his answer. There are moments during these where we see him bond with characters like Sato and Detective Katagari, but they are almost always passive. They happen to Jake and he reacts. The main character is flat, boring, with almost nothing interesting coming out of his mouth. And the problem isn't limited to Jake either. Almost no one on the show has anything interesting to say beyond what's right in front of them. Like there is nothing under the surface. And that's Tokyo Vice in a nutshell. 1,000 opportunities wasted on flat writing, horrendous pacing, and bad storytelling that makes an unbelievable story seem uninteresting in the hands of bad storytellers.